Welcome to the Fantasy NASCAR podcast brought to you by RaceForThePrize.com. New Hampshire weekend. Let's talk about the Cup Series. Let's hang out. It's Friday. Maybe you're listening to Saturday or even Sunday morning doing extra research, or even Sunday evening if we get weather. So I hope you're having a great time. Let's do some extra homework. Maybe find some picks that we weren't necessarily targeting. If you want to use the Fantasy NASCAR Spreadsheet to help yourself out, not just lean on the podcast, RaceForThePrize.com, July package, $30. I will throw in New Hampshire, Nashville, Chicago, Pocono, Indy, IRP, PayPal, Venmo, Cash App. No signing up, no subscriptions, no credit cards, no renewals. Just boom it over, boom, it's right back to you. New Hampshire, we got some salary prices. I don't really need to go over that. I think most of it is pretty straightforward. I guess the biggest surprise would be Christopher Bell being more expensive than Truex, given what he has done the last two seasons, but it's not that big of a difference. The thing that strikes me, and it probably struck you too as well, Denny Hamlin at 10,800 has not been running the greatest of late. And one of the reasons why Hamlin is so expensive, and I've mentioned this before on the podcast, often the DraftKings salaries are influenced by or almost represented by the sportsbook bets. And the sportsbook, for whatever reason, really likes Hamlin this week. You can take Hamlin in a head-to-head matchup with who was it? I can't remember, but I think it's Chase Elliott, and you're getting really good plus money on Chase Elliott. Now, I know some people aren't as bullish on Chase Elliott, but I look, for whatever reason, people have a hard time warming up to Elliott. We have these high expectations. We expect him to win every race, or maybe he lives in the shadows of Kyle Larson. They mentioned on SiriusXM radio the other day that this far into a season, Chase Elliott's average running position or finishing position this year is the best it has ever been in his career. So this far into a season, he has never run this well. And I know he's not out there dominating races, although he did win at Texas. And we have this idea right now because Penske's semi-hot, and JGR Toyota has been pretty good at the short tracks, and Larson is Larson. And maybe you're a little down on William Byron, and that's fine. But guess who's been there the entire time, through the ups and the downs, when JGR was hotter than Penske and Penske was hotter than Elliott has been right there in the top 5 the entire season. I like taking Elliott with plus money over Denny Hamlin, who's not really running that well. So something that you can definitely look at. And at 9,200, I'm really intrigued by Elliott. We're looking for top fives. We're looking for fast lap scraping at 9,200. That's a steal. And he could definitely win this race. Finish second in 2022. We're going to go over pit crew data here in a second. It's going to be huge. There's going to be pit road games at New Hampshire. Well, who's going to be best at playing the games? It's hard to tell. But who's going to be best actually doing the pit service? It's Chase Elliott's team. And I've said this before. Well, maybe his finishes are inflated by having a great pit crew. Fine. That's not going to change. They're not going anywhere, guys. That advantage will be there all year. Well, he's not that good. It's just his pit crew. Okay, that's fine. You know, you think of Major League Baseball, and you're hitting in the 3 spot, and you got Barry Bonds behind you. You've known those players throughout your career that you hated on. The guy hitting third in the order, like, he's not even that good of a hitter. It's just because there's an even better hitter behind him batting fourth, and so they have to pitch to him, and his stats are inflated. Okay, well, it doesn't change. That guy's batting behind him all season long, and he's going to benefit all season long. You're probably right. The guy hitting third in the order isn't the best. Just like in basketball. Maybe Scottie Pippen wasn't that good, but he had Jordan on his team. And teams had to focus on a guy named Michael Jordan. And so Scottie Pippen was often freed up to do things that he couldn't necessarily do, like when he was with the Blazers later in his career, although I'd argue Pippen was pretty good. And Pippen was pretty good for those Blazers teams in the late 90s. Who doesn't miss the Jail Blazers? What a team they had there. Anyway, sure, Elliott's stats are inflated, and they will stay inflated, and he's going to be a contender. All right, let's get into pit data. And we'll start just with who's been the best all year. Here it is. There it is. If we rank them, and we are looking at the combination of your pit crew. So that's what you see in the yellow. Inside his box, Elliott is averaging a 9.9. This is mainly his pit crew. And then we rank it on a given race. Now you could actually go straight numbers, which is what we're doing here. 9.9. And it's not going to really matter at the tracks, right? You don't have to say, oh, well, this track versus that track. Inside the box, take the time. The second thing on our screen in the blue is in-out time. This is not up to the pit crew. This is not the service time. This is where a driver can maximize minimize their time on pit lane. And Elliott's been really good. He's not the best, although he does have an insane streak of never getting caught speeding on pit road. So maybe that balances why he's not the absolute lightning quickest, but he has been very strong, 6th best in terms of getting to his box fast, getting out of his box fast. Another thing you also do have to factor in is where is that box located. The better you are at qualifying, the better your pit road box is, the easier it is in, the easier it is out. And the converse of that is true as well. If you do not qualify well, you get poor pit selection, and that's going to be reflected in your in-out time. Those are 2 stats that we really want to focus on, because you can have the greatest pit crew in the world, but if you're not getting in and out fast, then you've pretty much thrown that advantage away, or at least negated some of that advantage. And when we look at the 2 metrics, Elliott's number 1. And it's a stat that should matter. When we can get him at 9,200, and we're asking ourselves, can he run in the top 5? Because you got to run in the top 5 if you're going to scrape some fast laps. Does the car have enough speed? Yeah. Does he have enough talent? Yeah. And does he have a huge advantage of a pit crew that's going to keep him right there in that top 5 all day? Absolutely. 9,200, you got to love Chase Elliott. Next overall is William Byron, another Hendrick driver. 3rd in terms of pit box time at 10.2. You could actually argue it's 2nd because he is tied with Christopher Bell. We look at his most recent rankings. Last week, his pit crew was the 5th fastest. He also benefits from over the season. He has been the best at qualifying with a 9.6 average starting position. That means typically Byron's going to have a good pit box, and that's reflected in his 5th ranking. And so when we look at in-out, you can't really look at times because obviously pit roads are longer and shorter, and getting in and out of them are completely different. So you can't look at the actual number. What you can do is take the number, compare it against everybody in the field on that given day, and then rank them. And so if we go to Iowa, getting in and out of pit road, William Byron was 9th fastest. Before that, he had a string of top 5s. Allgaier, what's interesting about Allgaier is that really nothing. He's been filling in for Larson. Pretty fast in and out of pit road, but starting position, whatever. Let's skip down to Logano, 4th fastest overall. Not as fast with the pit crew, but again, he's 6th. It's 10.3. We're talking about a 1/10 of a second. Not a lot separates. The real separation is right here. And I think it probably would behoove us just to look at pit crews to start out instead of looking at overall. And so we've got Elliott with a very significant advantage in terms of service time. Then we've got Bell, Byron, Cindric, all pretty much right there. Logano's not too far behind. And that's fine. That's great. That's awesome. These are drivers that we're already targeting to be hogs and dominators. And we need those kind of pit crews to keep those drivers in the game, to keep those drivers from losing positions inside the top 5 or even losing the lead. And that's always a little bit of a feather in their cap when you're selecting. That's really going to be significant and important this week if you think it's going to be Bell over Truex at New Hampshire. And one of the arguments that you could clearly make is, look, Bell, second fastest pit crew, does have a top 10, a little bit slower on the in-out. It is a bit of a concern, although he does have that number 1 at Kansas. But if we are just comparing him to Truex, a little bit faster in and out, which is typically what we expect from more experienced drivers, more veteran drivers, but it's not too much of a difference. On average, Truex is 13.6 versus Bell's 15th ranking. Overall, that means Truex has been the 11th fastest on pit road, whereas Bell's been 14th. So they both have not been elite by any means. But we jump over to pit service time, and we see Truex down here at 13th. His pit crew not doing him any favors. And you can see here, they were better at Iowa. But before that, they had a string of not being the top 10 fastest pit crew. I mean, that's giving up a position or two. You give up a position or two at New Hampshire, he's not in the lead anymore. Now, you can make an argument that, Truex kind of has dealt with this his entire career. And if you look at the New Hampshire race from last year, he was able to actually pass for the lead several times. When he regained the lead in New Hampshire, it wasn't pit road games. We see other people play pit road games, and we're going to see plenty of pit road games because tire fall off probably not going to happen. But Truex, when you score 150 fantasy points in a race, you probably got a pretty good car, and he was making passes. So you can go in that direction. Anyway, back to where we were reviewing pit crews. Maybe you boost up Daniel Suarez a little bit because his pit crew's been fast. Ty Gibbs, as we mentioned before in the podcast, very similar to Suarez, but Suarez comes at a lot cheaper rate and with different expectations. But yeah, Gibbs has a fast pit crew, and look at these times. But the problem is, like most young drivers, not very fast at getting in and out. And his is, same thing can be said of Suarez. Not great at getting in and off of pit road, and he should be better at this point in his career. But one thing that should stand out is Suarez has not typically qualified well this season, and his pit selection's always been a lot rougher. And so for him to actually be not that far from Gibbs in terms of in-off time, whereas Gibbs, 5th best starting position this year, he has premium locations often, and he just does not minimize his time getting in and getting out of pit road. And when his price becomes inflated, it becomes tough to roster him. Although, speaking of Gibbs, he did have a pretty good New Hampshire race last year. In the end, it didn't work out. He got caught up in the wreck. But he started shotgun in the field, and by the end of stage 2, he was already knocking on the door of the top 10. Was able to pass cars. Now, could he have passed cars in the top 10? Probably not, but it was his rookie season. And for him to make those gains, that was pretty good, pretty strong. Look, you just worry about him on pit road. Running at the top 10, you got Blaney, you got Barry. Look at Barry's pit crew. 5-1, 5-4. Pretty solid efforts. One thing I will note about Barry this week, we do not have a 50-minute big-time practice session. We'll have the small sessions again, broken into A and B. Not a lot of time to work on things. And as I mentioned earlier in the week on the podcast, Rodney Childers revealed that when we have the real traditional practice, and he says, hey, we don't need to go back to the massive 3 practice schedules, but we do really need an hour-long time so that we can actually change springs and work on the car and give the driver plenty of reps so they can analyze data and work and grow. And you could see that with Barry last week. Maybe you can even make an argument that Stenhouse benefited from that last week, regardless of what their practice data said. Regardless of, they took the data within that 50 minutes and then turned it into some really cool stats on the scoreboard of meaninglessness. But just getting the reps, thinking about the adjustments, making small adjustments, tinkering with things in a 50-minute session, we're not going to have that this week. And we can very much easily see the advantage go back or swing in the direction of the elite teams that already have giant notebooks, who have simulators, who know what to expect. And so we could see SHR and the mid-pack drivers take a step back because they can't benefit from a healthy practice session. Could hurt Barry this week. All right, let's look at in-out time. I'm not going to go through every driver. Maybe we'll see if there's someone here like, and wow, let's just make some real quick notes like, oh, that's not very good. That kind of hurts the playability. Hey, Chastain ranking 12th is fine. Truex 13th is fine. Sure, we would love it for it to be better. In comparison, we're expecting Truex to lead a lot of laps and be a hog. I don't know if we're necessarily can need that from Chastain. And so for a driver to lead laps and stay out front, it really need a fast pit crew. So that does definitely hurt. Keselowski, 15th, but if we look here, he did have a string of races where he was pretty good, where his crew is really good. And you also notice those are some of his better races, right? Darlington, he finished first, second, third. Oh, I also had a really good pit crew that day. So goes Brad Keselowski's pit crew. So goes Brad Keselowski. Gragson, fine. Like to see Bubba Wallace's crew be a little bit faster. He is very aggressive getting in and out of pit road. Derek Krause's team here. Colleague has some pretty good pit crews. And we go down and we see Alex Bowman. We think, that might hurt his overall performance. But that's mainly because of some bad days. Really, the crew's been not that bad. And we're talking about tenths of seconds. Reddick, Busch, not that exciting. Any value down here with fast pit crews? Not really. About where you expect everybody to be. We can look at some in-out times real quick, and then I'm going to go through some practice data from last year and some trends that might help you with New Hampshire. Thanks for hanging out. RaceForThePrize.com. July package, Nashville, Chicago, Pocono, Indy, Lucas Oil, Indianapolis Race Park, PayPal, Venmo, Cash App. Come on now. Get in on it. All right, in-out time. Larson, top dog. Anyone surprised? Do I need to explain any more? Kyle Busch, third on our board, really second on our board if we ignore Allgaier. Anyone surprised that Kyle Busch is aggressive getting in on pit road? Bubba Wallace, not that surprised. William Byron with a very good starting position. Not surprised that he is I want to say maximized, but minimizing entry and exit. Elliott's up there. Reddick's been pretty good. Reddick has been held back by the crew. Come on, crew. Reddick's doing his job. If the crew ever gets on the same page, that could open up the door for a big day for Reddick. Logano, veteran, taking care of business. Chastain, anyone surprised that he's aggressive? Hamlin rounding out our top 10. Then Truex, veteran drivers. Bowman getting the job done. How about Austin Dillon? Not bad. Bell, come on. Got to work on this, but we have seen Christopher Bell have some poor starting positions and maybe not the best pit selection. And when you factor in not having the greatest pit box, it would make sense why his in and out times have not been the greatest. You have to make sure that you weigh that in. If you get Christopher Bell with a top 10 position, we would clearly expect him to have a better in-out time. And what I'm saying is I would not overreact to, can't play Bell, or I'm going to downgrade him because he's just 14th on the board. This is a number that can easily flip. When you go over here to pit service time, this is pretty static. We can't imagine all of a sudden that a pit crew this far in the season, if they are slow, are suddenly going to be fast. I'll say that again. So the yellow, the left side, the pit service time, the pit crew time, your 9.9 seconds, your 10.2, they are who they are. This is probably not going to change for the rest of the season. The drivers with fast pit crews, not going to change. This, at least as far as statistics go, is much more fluid, more dynamic, in that it's heavily influenced by starting position. And just because statistically a driver has not been that fast getting in and out of pit road, that doesn't mean they're going to be slow again this week. If they get a good pit box this week, then you could definitely expect them to do much better than on average. And then the same could be said if they have a really poor pit box and they are really good at getting in and out, they're not going to be able to replicate their earlier season numbers. Now, we do like to look overall at the trends, though, because we do tend to see that drivers that we would expect to be aggressive getting in and out are the drivers that we would think are those guys. And the veterans tend to do better because they've just done it so many more times and been at all these different tracks and had the experience. Whereas the younger cats, not so much. Let's jump to some recap from last season. So as I mentioned before, quick practice session. I think that's going to hurt some of our mid-pack drivers. We'll have to wait and see, but it seems to make a lot of sense to me. I mean, just think about it. You're going to get less practice. If you need practice, that's not good. Truex probably doesn't need more practice. And he's fine. It's not really an advantage or disadvantage to him. But people that are trying to catch up to him, people that are trying to cut into his dominance, you're basically pulling the chair out from under them by doing it. That's whatever. So it goes, something to think about. Now, first thing I want to look at, we have the drivers sorted by their rating rank, which you can't see on the screen because I've made things too small. So let me pause it to fix that. And we're back on this Friday morning. So drivers from New Hampshire are listed in terms of an integer or integral ranking of driver rating from top to bottom. Truex with a perfect score of 150. Logano significantly lower at 114. So one of the things that I've always mentioned is the dumbed down version of going 1, 2, 3, 4. It's just good shorthand. It doesn't really show the truth, though, in that, yep, well, Logano's second best. Second best was pretty far away from first. And second best is pretty close to third and fourth and fifth. So you can always look at driver rating, or if you're just looking at the fast lap set, and even then, like, so what? Anyway, what I want to notice, though, is, so we look at driver rating, and we look at the best drivers, who had the best races statistically, and you're going to notice that they started second, fourth. We'll skip these two boys real quick. Fifth, ninth, third, 13th, 6th, 8th, 1, 17th, 7. Looks like track position race to me, kids. Looks like it's not going to be easy to pass, kids. So when I'm picking drivers this week who are going to get fast laps, they're coming from up front. And we already talked about that in previous podcasts, especially if you want our lap leader. We're looking at those front rows. And you can check out that old New Hampshire podcast, especially if we get a rainy weekend in Loudon, New Hampshire, up there in New England, DraftKings backyard. And you got some podcasts to listen to. They're there at my channel. Like, subscribe, share. But I'm definitely targeting drivers that are going to be running up front. It's not going to be easy to pass. There isn't any tire fall off. You're kind of just going to stay up there where you are. Again, we look at driver rating. Look at our top 14 drivers here. Most of them running up front. You got Larson, who qualifies a little poorly. Hamlin, who qualifies a little poorly. Not really surprised to see them quickly make their way up through stage 1 and 2. Get around the top 5 and hang around the top 5 for most of the race. But no one really has anything for Truex all day. They're easily able to get into good positions around that 5th place. But from there, no dice. Starting position, driver rating, got it. Check. As I just mentioned, tires don't really matter. Wasn't a lot of fall off. So that means we're going to get pit road games. So even with these guys up front, we could see a couple sneak in terms of maybe not having a great driver rating. So the guys up front are going to have a clear advantage all day. They should be able to maintain their position for the most part throughout the entire race, score statistics that say, hey, we're a great driver. But when we ultimately look at who scores the most fantasy points, which doesn't necessarily connect with like other sports where, if LeBron James is the best play on a given slate and scores, say, 80 points. Well, to score 80 fantasy points in basketball, you have to be good the entire game. You can't just be good in the fourth quarter. And in baseball, you can kind of get away with that if you can strike out 3 times and just hit home runs. So that's not a good example. Baseball's baseball. The NFL, it's kind of tricky too as well because you can hit a big play, and that can definitely elevate a receiver. Gets 2 big plays. But if we look at basketball, you want to have a big day, you got to be good all day. You need to have a good driver rating. But that's not how NASCAR works. We don't score based on who had the best day all day. We score based on who had the best lap at the very end. Single last lap for the most part. Now you're going to say, oh, well, that's not true. We got all these points. Cool. That's one driver in the lineup. One driver at the end of the day in your fantasy lineup was actually scored based on what they did all day. The majority of your lineup every single week is really only scored by the final lap. And so looking at driver rating doesn't really give us the best representation. We want to know how fantasy points, what you're going to score. We know that driver rating from New Hampshire seemed to correlate with track position. And that's great for the one guy who's actually going to be scored based on driver rating. But the rest of our lineup is likely going to be heavily influenced not by driver rating and maybe not by starting position. There's going to be a lot of factors that go into what that lineup's going to ultimately look at. But the one thing we do know for sure is that final lineup is all dependent on just the last lap. The other laps matter, but really when we're scoring out the rest of our lineup, it's just what was that last lap, not what you did all race long. And we're talking about a New Hampshire race where we're going to get games on pit road where you don't take tires. And we've looked at this before where we got these cautions at the end where guys did not take tires and ran long and benefited. Austin Dillon, he does take tires, but he runs long and takes them at a point where when it comes the caution on 272, his tires are not that old, he can stay out. See, Kevin Harvick does the same thing. He can stay out. Eric Jones doesn't even pit, stays out the entire time. So he is able to pit and take tires, but he's cycled up to a spot where he's now inside the top 20-ish with fresh tires. That's New Hampshire. These guys did not have good driver ratings. Jones and Dillon in particular. We'll pull them up. What was Jones? Or Austin Dillon. Optimal. Just the 19th best driver. Eric Jones is 26th. If we look at his driver rating of 54.9, we're going to have games in New Hampshire. Tires don't matter. We're going to open up some rando value. Well, why do I say that? Because, like always, I know you. And especially if we get rain. You don't know me. I know you. You don't know nothing, man. I probably don't. But I still love you. Anyway, so let's imagine it's a rainy weekend in Loudon, New Hampshire, and you're sitting there going over data. I know what you're going to do. You're going to look at practice data. You're going to go through the lap-by-lap data. And that's great and it's awesome. And you're going to have access to all that practice data at racefortheprize.com. MO Cash App. But let me warn you, because I don't want to lead you astray. I'm always as transparent as possible. I would argue I'm one of the most transparent DFS providers you're going to run into. Put it all on the page. Share all the data. You pay to play. I give it away. I give it right to you. Give you the data. I don't just, every once in a while I drop it in Discord. Every once in a while I feel like giving you the data you pay for. No, you pay to be a part of this. You're getting your data. And barring some unfortunate circumstances or a NASCAR feed, you get what you pay for. You don't like, oh, Is he going to drop the data in the Discord? Is he going to give us a sheet this week? Is he going to share anything? Or, oh no, just doing a show. Okay, just doing it right. So I'm paid for this. Cool. And you're not giving me anything. And then you're just giving everything away in a free show to people. What am I paying for? No, I'm not going to do that to you. Transparent. So here you are, Sunday, let's say it's a Sunday evening. You're tinkering with lineups for whatever reason. Maybe they didn't lock the lineups. And you're looking at the lap by lap data. You got to be careful. But why is that? Well, the same reason I just mentioned. Pit road games, no tire fall off, running long. Eric Jones, 26th driver rating, wasn't very fast in practice. We can talk about Briscoe a little bit more in a second. But yeah, Briscoe actually ends up being a lot better. We do know that SHR, short flat tracks, especially this one, can run pretty well. And his times really should have been a lot better than they were. He actually did have a decent car. But Austin Dillon sneaking into the optimal lineup. You think the practice data is going to tell you that? You think the practice data is going to give you everything you need to know when it rubbers up from A to B? Are you going to be able to trust it? You can use it, but just be careful with it. That is me. That is giving you the warning, whether there's weather or not. If you're looking at the lap by lap data, please be careful, and especially with the value. And I said it last week when, I got a lot wrong with Iowa because we were expecting chaos. But one of the things that I did get right was I wasn't so much worried about the practice data from Iowa. I really believed that any of the value drivers were going to be available. And I went over that in the pre-race show. When I did my live show last week, as opposed to, 60-minute chat session, hanging out, fielding questions, I thought about what are the most significant points? What do you really need to know? How could I really benefit you? That is how I present these shows. This podcast is not about me. It's not a selfie podcast. You don't see me on the screen. You can't see the reverse osmosis tank behind me. You can't see the DraftKings banner where I do my shoots or the stone wall that I painted. The dungeon is not on display. You don't need to see the actual cave. This is not a man cave. This is actually a bear cave. There are animals and creatures down here. It is centipede season and my wife is losing her mind. We got earwigs, folks. You want to put some earwigs on the screen? You want to look at that? No, you don't. What you want is give me the data, give me the information. How can I turn on this podcast and make better picks? Not selfie fun time, not look at my cool stuff time. It's work, it's serious. And so when I record a 10-minute podcast, it's not, why we want to get in 10 minutes? Because I value your time. It's Sunday. It's Saturday. Go be with your family. Go out and do something. And I'm not yelling at you. I'm saying, look, you don't need to spend your weekend with me. You don't need to spend your weekend watching the screen in front of a computer. And I know that kind of sounds preachy, but it's not supposed to be. It's me just trying to be like, hey, no, man, cool. No, you do your thing. Go get out there. Even if it's just going to McDonald's, go, whatever, see you. You're cool. I'll only take up a couple minutes every time. I don't want you to have to wait around for an hour to get your chat question answered. I want you to wait an hour while someone just randomly talks about random stuff and then finally eventually gets around to something, but then it's lost in all the sauce. They just talked about every single person and only said nothing about every single person. The enemy of perfect is good, folks. Or the enemy of good is perfect. Try to cover everybody, you cover no one. And I see this in every DFS show. And I know I'm getting off a tangent, but hey, here we are. We're late into the podcast. It's Friday. We're having fun. We've covered our topics. And we're going to get to it in a second, leaning on that practice data and whether you should or not. But you try to cover every driver in a show. You are magically masterful at really covering no one. And so it's often better to give you a 10-minute podcast where I hit the key point and get right to it. And you remember that key point. As opposed to if I talk for an hour, like, wait, what did he say about that one driver? Oh, yeah, I remember he said nothing. He didn't even mention that guy. When he did that, one guy was like, oh, he sucks. And then he won. He didn't go into any deep analysis, comprehension, or comprehensive analytics. When you get a 10-minute podcast, it's because I've thought about what I need you to know and want you to know. And what I did last week in that podcast was to say, these drivers at the bottom, their speeds don't look that good. But the way that this Iowa race could play out is that they're going to hang on to the lead lap, and you get some cautions, and they're going to surprise people. And most of the field is going to differentiate value based on stats, current form, short track stats, which we got on the screen over here if you ever want. Racefortheprize.com, get those short track data points. You can do that. But I felt like it was the week where you needed to take the stats and kind of push up a little to the side and say, no, you know what? These guys starting in the 30s, 27, they may not look good in practice, may not have the stats, but there's so many unknowns and so many variables at play at Iowa that they can make it work. And they did. So you won a bunch of money? Nope. I fell asleep on Father's Day and didn't even change my lineup. Oh, burn. Transparent and honest. This Father's Day, got some time to myself. I'm not a nap guy. I am not a nap guy. I'm a wake up at 3 a.m. and just running hard all day guy, and then crash. And then wake up at 3 a.m. and then running hard all day and crash. Not a nap guy. Father's Day, decided I'm taking a nap. Did not wake up. Oh man, when I did wake up and the race was on, I was like, son of a, what did I, so Father's Day's ruined. Father's Day is ruined. Worst Father's Day ever. Why did I take a nap? Never nap, folks. Never get off the boat, never take a nap. This podcast is all over the place. Last thing I want to talk about. Again, pit road being what it's going to be, tires not falling off. We could see some sneaky value that wasn't really fast in practice slide through again with the driver running low. There's your warning. Again, I'm not saying completely fade practice data, but keep that in the back of your head, in the back of mind. I'd actually have it more towards the frontal lobe. I would be much more aware, cognizant of that before I pull the trigger on picking my value picks. So maybe a slight downgrade on practice day. I think the last thing worth mentioning is our AB session. Let's look at this, folks. So again, let's sort it based on qualifying. Does anyone know what's unique about this? What do you see it's different here? So we're looking at our qualifying order 1 through 18. Boy, it sure seems to be a lot of B's right here in the teens. Now remember, those qualifying rules, after we set round 1, basically the fastest cars fill out, 11 through 40. Well, now they go by session. So they'll go fastest in A, then fastest B, fastest in A, fastest in B. It used to be, if you just missed out on qualifying, all right, where's everybody else fill out? Well, there's a bit of an advantage for Group B, who had a better idea of what the track was going to look like. Got to see the Group A qualifying session. If you practiced in B, then you practiced on a track that was rubbered up. And so when you went back out and qualified, you had a better idea of the grip level. Whereas if you practiced in A, track has a much more rubber after B goes out, then you have to jump in there and qualify. And often what we saw was the Group A qualifiers could not really match what the Group B advantage had. So NASCAR changed the rules. But what this definitely tells us is Group A had a different track than Group B. And if that happened last year, then it's going to happen this year. And like we often see is that the Group A times are going to be inflated because they're in a greener track that's much faster. We look at our 10 fastest laps, well, top 9. All the 9 fastest laps came from, you guessed it, Group A, the green track. And we have all these guys that look incredibly fast, and it's hard to tell. Obviously, Truex was a monster. But McDowell was about a 15th place car, looked like a monster in practice because he went out with Group A. So you have to understand, Justin Haley, oh baby, 3rd fastest, 5-lap run. End of the day, 25th in terms of driver rating rank. And he also is one of those guys that when they finally have to go out there and qualify on the rubbered up track, he drops all at 19th. You're going to have to adjust for that this weekend. And so that means dialing down some of our Group A drivers, first of all. And then your second thing is to look at your Group B drivers and say, well, maybe they're a little faster than what we've witnessed because they were on a rubbered up track. You should know the drill at this point. So if they're Group B and they're not that fast, you're going to want to compare not apples to oranges, but Group B to Group B. So maybe downgrade some A practice times, upgrade some B practice times. But also, another thing I want to note that I don't think gets enough attention, and it's not as significant of a point this year than it was in the past because they fixed qualifying. But again, as we talk about inflation, these drivers have inflated qualifying positions. Had all things been equal, and each driver be prepared for the same track, Austin Dillon doesn't qualify at 11th. Daniel Suarez probably doesn't qualify 12th. This year they have adjusted it a little bit, so it goes A, B, A, B, A, B, so it's not as inflated. But these guys then also are maybe held back a little bit. And we could see some Group A drivers qualify in the 20s because the track has changed. And there could be some value there. We have seen, I think McDowell did the same thing at Iowa last week. Track changed, he couldn't qualify very well. You might find some value in Group A qualifiers who, they have some inflated practice times, but when they have to go and qualify, they're at a disadvantage, and they should have qualified a lot better than they would have. And you're going to have some B guys that are going to look faster than they should have simply because the A guys are at a disadvantage. So there's some ways to find some value and to go through. I think we've covered just about everything. And I've even thrown in some spicy rants. How about it? Spicy lobster roll. What do you think about that? It is New Hampshire. Thanks for joining me, guys. As always, racefortheprize.com July package. I will include New Hampshire. Just so it's said again. I know people can say, Nashville's in June. Nashville's in June. Where's the Nashville sheet? I know it's going to come. It's been posted on my website since the beginning of the month, since May, that Nashville is in the July package. It has been there. It has been published since May. You can check the timestamps, May 21st to be specific. When you're going to, I know I'm going to get the email, hey, I can't get this Nashville sheet you didn't buy July. Yeah, but the race is on June 30th. That's right. It is. I know the calendar. I can watch the moon and the sun and see it rise and fall. I understand exactly how these things work. But what mainly works is, what did I say on racefortheprize.com? Nashville will be in the July package, along with Chicago, Pocono, Indy, and IRP. And if you pay $30, you can get New Hampshire thrown in, which is actually part of June. There it is. Venmo, PayPal, Cash App, like, subscribe, share. I hate to end with such saltiness, but it's going to happen. Who's going to be that guy? You want to be that guy? You're going to be the guy that emails me? Of course not. If you've listened this long on the podcast, you know how everything is. You're not that silly. But it will happen. And that's okay. That's the game. Thanks for joining me. Like, subscribe, share. Blessed to have you guys around. Really love you guys. Trip life fantastic.